All right. What's up? What's up? It's the Ascension of Babylon. What we do here is we talk about the occult, we talk about spirituality, and we talk about the healing process in relation to genuine and deep shadow integration. What we're going to be talking about in this video is why the Fae are so misunderstood, as well as the deeper initiatory process that interacting with the Fae is going to bring us into naturally. So first things first, let's start with why the Fae are so misunderstood. In the modern spiritual space today, even the modern, what we can call the occult space, where people are working with the occult sciences, some people call themselves magicians, witches, they practice things like witchcraft, they're utilizing manifestation techniques and performing certain rituals and connecting with spirits and things of that nature. There are a lot of people who are very willing to work with other spirits, but because of the mythology and folklore that they've been introduced to, they are very afraid to connect with the Fae. They look at faeries as the equivalent to how Christians look at demons, as these evil spirits that want your soul, and they're going to take things from you, and they're going to fuck your life up, and things of that nature. But none of this is actually true. Just because folklore or mythology says something specific about a spirit doesn't mean it's true, doesn't mean it's an accurate depiction of that spirit's nature. It's either symbolic for something deeper, or it's just what people believed at the time. And because people believed it, doesn't mean it's true. Or if people believe it, doesn't mean it is true. So it's really important to understand this when it comes to any spirit at all. Any intelligence, whether it's an angel, a demon, some primordial force, something in between, whatever it is. Because, when we're working with these beings, we want to have an accurate understanding of how working with them relates to who and what we are, and relates to the process that's probably going to unfold as the natural byproduct of working with, whatever that spiritual force is. So, the Fae are very, very misunderstood. There are people that completely demonize them and completely reject them and think they're bad because of what they've read, and then, just go off of what other people say. And then there are people that actually completely whitewash them as if they're these nice pixies or fairies that float around and they're all love and light and they grant your wishes and stuff like that. Neither is true. So the Fae are primal forces of nature who are emanations of the earth soul. And Mother Nature, as creative and as nurturing as she can be, is also equally destructive. And this doesn't make her something to reject. This doesn't make her evil. This makes her a force of balance. We have the death cycle and we have the life cycle. We have creation and we have destruction. When a volcano erupts, if it kills a bunch of people, that doesn't make it evil. It is a natural event that happens, and if it's happening, it is for the sake of balance. It is what it is, right? Nature can be as ugly and as destructive as she is also very beautiful and very nurturing. This is the polarity of how nature operates. So the Fae operate in a similar way. There's a polarity to them. There's the more nurturing, supporting aspects, and then there's the aspects that support through death, through destruction, through pressure, and through dissolution, in the very same way that nature supports us through these polarized aspects. The Fae are extensions of nature. They're not to be feared or rejected. Not saying that everyone's meant to work with them, because not everyone is, but they're not meant to be feared. They're not meant to be rejected. We don't need to project our inner narratives and fear-based programming onto them, but we also do not want to whitewash them the same way we wouldn't want to whitewash a lion in the jungle. A lion in a jungle is an important part of nature. That's why it exists. It's not there for no reason, you know. But a lion is potentially a very dangerous animal to come in contact with, you know. It just is what it is. So the Fae operate in a very similar way. And I don't want you to think that, you know, connecting with the Fae is like going out into the jungle and coming across a lion, because the Fae are probably not going to kill you. But there is that more predatory, destructive, dissolving component to their nature. But the way that that relates to us is it is actually a dissolving of different layers of the psyche that are more so rooted in what we are not rather than rooted in what we are. These are protective layers that we create that are fueled by both trauma that we're suppressing and the need to avoid that trauma. So these protective layers that I'm talking about are protector parts of us that are running on certain programs that cause them to project certain identities in which we then attach to certain beliefs, and then we loop in these negative karmic cycles of avoiding what we're really feeling inside, identifying with certain protector parts at the expense of other rejected parts of us that are in association with our wounded inner child and in association with our primal nature. The qualities of being that we were taught from a young age are not safe to embody and are not safe to feel because, you know, we're organized, we're better than that, and it is uncivilized to see ourselves as animals. So most human beings reject the primal self and have an unhealthy relationship with the primal self because most human beings have been taught that it is unsafe to be primal. It is unsafe to embrace our inner animal. But no matter what we do, no matter how much we disassociate from what's going on in our body and from our body and physical nature in general, we will never be able to run away from the primal self in a way that is actually sustainable for our evolutionary process. We might be able to live in a mentally dominated reality to where we live in our minds, we're disassociated from our bodies because of it, and we live in this narrative that we're not animals and that we're above the animal kingdom and, you know, all of that stuff. But the truth is we are animals, and what we suppress will run us unconsciously. So working with the Fae is a process of becoming conscious of the aspects of the unconscious that are associated with our primal beast and the primal desires that come with that primal beast. And it's a process of reintegrating those primal desires in the parts of us that those desires are connected to. That is an unfolding process when we're working with fairies. And this is why people unconsciously project certain narratives onto them, because the Fae both represent and bring us into the very parts of self the very parts of our human nature that most people have been taught to reject. So, of course, they're going to reject the idea of fairies being something good, being something that's actually very helpful and beneficial for us to interact with. If we're willing to embrace the evolutionary process, we can even say the initiatory process that comes with working with these spirits. Fairies connect us with the body, and they uproot all of the different programs and all of the different parts of us that are causing us to live in a way that's disassociated from the body. Therefore, the parts of us that are also keeping our nervous system in a dysregulated state. Most people don't want to see these parts for what they are. Most people don't want to understand that these parts are operating in a false, trauma-influenced way, because people know on a deeper level that there's a process of deconditioning that happens when we become aware of how these protector parts are operating to keep us disassociated from the body. And the reason why we disassociate from the body by identifying with these parts of us at the expense of other parts of us and at the expense of connecting with our more animalistic, primal nature is because there's trauma stored in the body, and that trauma has an energetic resonance that we experience as negative emotions that we've been conditioned by our parents and conditioned by society to not feel, and to even feel unsafe acknowledging. So there's a lot of conditioning that goes into why we feed parts of us that have us disassociate from our body. Working with the Fae will be a process of acknowledging these parts of us and the methods that they're using to keep us disassociated from our body, while simultaneously the emotions that we were utilizing those parts to avoid, separate us from, and bypass now get to come to the surface in a way that gives us the ability to process those negative energies and to actually release them, which is also unburdening the other parts of us that we suppressed. We can even say we imprisoned, we locked away by only identifying with the select few parts of us that we felt safer identifying with. Once again, these are known as protector parts. Even though they're called protector parts, the only thing they're protecting us from is evolving to a deeper degree. What they are is disassociated parts. They help us disassociate from what's actually going on inside, and by inside, I mean in our bodies. So the Fae begin dissolving the roles that these parts are playing, which could be very uncomfortable in itself, because we thought we were these parts, we thought we were the identity that these parts are projecting to keep us in a disassociated state. I work at this job, I do this thing, I learn this thing, I'm never going to change, this is who I am, all of that stuff. So just dissolving the role that the part is in and the identity that it's projecting to uphold its role is uncomfortable enough. But then these more wounded parts of us that we've been suppressing using the protectors are now going to come to the surface in the form of emotional states that can be very uncomfortable to be present with when we've literally been wired to disassociate from those parts and from those emotional states when they come up. So this is why people reject the Fae, and this is why a lot of people have not only created negative narratives about them in relation to their folklore and mythology, but people also believe these narratives without questioning them, because it's much easier to believe the narrative than it is to actually process these heavier, more so dense emotions that most people are actually running away from. Even in the spiritual space, you would think that more people are actually wanting to embrace a process of genuine shadow integration, but a lot of people are just using spirituality as a way to add on to those protective layers, to feed different narratives and subconscious programs that are meant to keep them away from what these spiritual practices could actually help us bring up and can actually support us in feeling through, so we can release those suppressed, trapped, negative energies and then reintegrate the parts of us that those emotional, energetic states were actually connected to. This is the process that unfolds when we start connecting with the Fae. And the reason why this unfolds more specifically is because these programs that I was talking about, these protector parts of us and protective layering, and the trauma that we use those parts to suppress, are layers that we build over the primal self that act as an interfering kind of energy or frequency, keeping us from actually being able to reintegrate these primal components of our being. Fairies are bringing us through the necessary process that we need to go through, letting go of certain protector parts and identifying with them, processing the emotions that's underneath the surface of all of that. And then what emerges from this are the more animalistic qualities of our nature that we now get to embrace within the self in a way that is healthy and sustainable for our evolutionary process. And when we embrace the animal self or the primal self, we actually find real safety within our body, and our nervous system actually starts to regulate itself. But, once again, like I referred to earlier, this can be a very uncomfortable process because most humans have rejected their primal nature, or at the very least built an unhealthy relationship with the more animalistic qualities of their being. So there is a major rewiring that is taking place. And this rewiring can be quite uncomfortable because we've been conditioned in a way to where we've, on a nervous system level, wired ourselves to uphold the very kinds of identities and protector parts and inner narratives that I was referring to earlier. And we actually get a chemical release by feeding those identities. These identities and parts of us and just those protective layers in general release dopamine when we're feeding them because it's become a conditioned behavior and a conditioned way of being. So as we're actually being deconstructed by working with the Fae and deconditioned, there's this nullifying effect that takes place to where it's like we're getting starved for dopamine. We no longer actually feel comfortable being the version of us that is now getting dissolved away, so we can actually at some point later on emerge a version of us that is much more healthy, much more aligned to the way our soul wants to express itself, and much more aligned with the primal qualities of our being that, once again, we were taught to reject. Working with the Fae actually brings us into, a deeper relationship with Mother Earth, a deeper relationship with the earth soul that actually wants to nurture us. But so many of us are just so out of resonance with the earth soul, out of resonance with receiving that nurturing, out of resonance with both our own natural cycles of destruction and creation, life and death. So working with the Fae is a major reconstruction process, deconstruction process, and recalibration process that, yes, can be uncomfortable, but eventually we get brought back to our primal roots. Our nervous system goes from being unregulated or dysregulated to re-regulating itself in the most aligned way possible. And, we balance our higher states of being or our higher bodies of energy with our lower animalistic primal self. We can't actually embody higher states of awareness in a long-term sustainable way if we're not actually building a foundation of understanding the lower states of awareness and understanding the primal self. When we don't have a connection with the primal self, we will always feel unsafe in our body. It doesn't matter what spiritual practice we're doing. Doesn't matter if we're trying to go to 5D, double Ds, 10Ds, whatever the fuck it is. None of that shit matters if it's not being grounded in the physical body or into the physical body. And the physical body is going to be directly associated with our primal self. Our primal selves are what paved the way for us to exist in a more civilized society today, to where there's technology and there's, more safety and things of that nature. Not saying the world is perfect, but we came a long way from the way that we used to exist when we were in the wild hunting for our food. When there was much more extreme levels of tribalism. When we were always in this survival stress kind of energy, and that's just how it was. We came a long way from that, but we don't want to reject the parts of ourselves that make us great and that paved the way for us to actually live in a society where we can also exist in a way that is much more regulated. So we want to remember that. It's our ancestors who were very driven by their primal nature and very connected to their primal nature that made it so we can live in the more comfortable state that we live in today. And just because we don't live in the state that our ancestors were existing in once upon a time, doesn't mean that we don't have these more primal layers of being. Those primal layers of being have to be nurtured and they have to be integrated, or we're just not being authentic to who we are, and we're not actually going to have a real sense of safety within our own bodies. So many people in our society today live in a space of survival stress, and they live in a space where they're over-identifying with the mind and living in their heads to basically run away from the fact that they feel really unsafe on a body consciousness level. And this is what happens when we don't integrate our trauma and when we reject the primal self, which will always be related to trauma, because only people that have a lot of trauma that's unprocessed are going to reject their primal self. So working with the Fae is going to bring us into a process of trauma healing. they're going to bring us through a process of dissolving certain aspects of the ego that are keeping us in a disassociated state in relation to the body and in relation to the emotional states that certain parts of us are existing in relation to that suppressed trauma. And underneath the surface of all of that, the purpose is to actually reintegrate our primal animalistic nature, to connect to the roots of what we are as human beings, which is the primal self. This is the process that unfolds for us when we are working with the Fae. They are not evil entities. They are not entities that just want to hurt you for the fuck of it or anything like that. Yes, they can be destructive. Yes, there's a dissolving process that comes with working with them. Yes, they can have certain trickster qualities and things of that nature, but they are also very nurturing entities that are willing to support your evolutionary process if you're a person that wants to get to know yourself on that deeper, raw, primal level. This is what I wanted to share in today's video. I appreciate you for staying all the way to the end, and I will catch you in the next video. Thank you.